Towards a New Socialism. Section. Levels of planning. Planning decisions may be broken down into 3 levels: macroeconomic planning, strategic planning, and detailed production planning. The connection between these levels is as follows. First, a macroeconomic plan sets certain general parameters governing the evolution of the economy over time. Specifically, it concerns the breakdown of total production, or as we would prefer to express it, the breakdown of total labor time, between various highly aggregated categories of end use. How much of society's labor should be devoted to the production of consumer goods? How much to the provision of social goods such as health, education, or socialized childcare? How much to the accumulation of means of production to augment the future productive capacity of the economy? And how much, if any, to the repayment of foreign debt or the acquisition of foreign assets? A macroeconomic plan must answer these questions. It must also address the question of how intensively the economy's given productive capacity should be exploited. The answer here is not necessarily to the maximum, although that will be the answer during wartime. A capitalist government may, for instance, decide to reduce aggregate demand and generate unemployment in order to reduce the rate of inflation. This is macroeconomic planning of a kind. A socialist planning agency will have no interest in creating unemployment, but equally it will not wish to work the population as hard as possible. There is a trade-off between productive labor and leisure time, and the macroeconomic planners will have to take into account the people's preferences in this respect when calculating how much labor time is available for the various uses. Second, the strategic plan concerns the changing industrial structure of the economy. Given that so much of the available labor time is to be devoted to public provision, so much to consumer goods, and so much to producer goods, which particular sectors should be developed, exploiting which technologies? Which types of goods should be imported, because they can be produced more cheaply elsewhere? Which industries should be phased out over the long run? In the context of strategic planning, issues such as the environmental impact of various industries and technologies, and the appropriate criteria for assessing potential investment projects must be addressed. Third, within the framework established by the macroeconomic and strategic industrial plans, detailed production planning concerns the precise allocation of resources. Which specific types of goods are to be produced in what quantities, using how much labor, and in which locations? Which productive units are to receive inputs from which others, and so on. Governments in capitalist economies are able to carry out some degree of macroeconomic and strategic industrial planning. Outside of wartime, they obviously do not attempt detailed production planning. But since these governments do not have property rights over the principal means of production, their ability to plan is limited and depends on the cooperation of capitalist enterprises and other private agents. Consider macroeconomic planning. Governments may, for instance, expand the money supply and lower interest rates with the intention of stimulating investment spending, causing a reallocation of resources in favor of accumulation of means of production. But if capitalist enterprises do not see investment as sufficiently profitable, low interest rates may fail to make much difference. Or again, a government may cut taxes in the hope of increasing total output and employment. But if the consumers who benefit from the tax break choose to spend their gains on imported goods, the result may be a trade deficit rather than domestic expansion. As for strategic industrial planning in a capitalist economy, the striking success story is the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry. The MITI has been able to foster a far-sighted adjustment of the structure of Japanese industry in the face of a changing pattern of world production and competitive advantage. Those industries which, in the calculation of MITI, offered the best prospect of long-run competitive growth were built up with the aid of state-funded research and development. One of the better accounts of this process is contained in Keith Smith, 1986. The success of MITI has proved hard to emulate. It depends on the willingness of capitalist enterprises in Japan to cooperate with the ministry, and a cooperative climate of industry-government relations cannot be legislated into existence. In principle, a socialist government with property rights over the means of production should be in a much better position to carry out coherent and effective macroeconomic and strategic industrial planning. The fact that such a government has the power to shape these aspects of the economy does not, of course, guarantee that this power will be used wisely. But if the planning process is open to debate, democratic whenever possible, and systematically calls upon the best efforts of the scientific community, there is good reason to hope that the results will be superior to those of the capitalist market. The next 5 chapters develop the concept of planning in various ways. Chapter 5 elaborates the issues involved in strategic planning. Chapter 6 sets out the requirements for effective detailed planning. Macroeconomic planning is discussed in Chapter 7, and the marketing of consumer goods in Chapter 8. Chapter 9 examines the issue of the informational requirements for the planning process as a whole. End of Chapter 4.